I just had so much culture shock coming from the Middle East into Germany. It's like polar opposite cultures, and I didn't even think about it. I was just like, this seems cool. I don't know the language. I don't know the people. This seems like it'll be fine. It was definitely like tricky. And I remember a lot of the time at uni, they would tell us we're never going to find jobs.
Hey there, risers and thrivers. Welcome back to On the Up and Up, the podcast amplifying the untold stories and achievements of the underrepresented and underestimated. I'm your host, Janine, and on this episode, I'm joined by a very special guest, Basant Shinoda. Unlike other guests, Basant is someone I've had the pleasure of getting to know during our first weeks living in Germany. As she mentioned, it was definitely a culture shock and a tough adjustment period. Understandably, studying and living abroad is never easy, but I want to emphasize Basant's remarkable resilience and determination. I have never, ever met someone so steadfast on their goals who continuously got back up again and again regardless of how many times life tried to knock her down. Which is why it comes as absolutely no surprise to me that she is one of the most prominent career content creators from the Middle East, who has amassed over 130,000 followers on LinkedIn and 50 million views on her content. Also, according to Faviccon's analytics company, she is the 7th most powerful female creator on LinkedIn. And she has also been featured in Worth It magazine's Worthy 100 2023 alongside the likes of Taylor Swift and Emma Stone, in addition to being featured in Fortune, Forbes, and many other global press outlets. However, her journey was very, very, very far from straightforward. Basant graduated from university without a job due to a lack of network, visa sponsorship, and career knowledge. However, through trial, error, and resilience, she has landed roles at tech giants like LinkedIn and Google, and is currently completing her master's in management at Harvard University. Like, can we give it up for this girl? Because she is killing it. Which is why during this episode, you'll not only be inspired by Basant's story, we'll also discuss how she did it, how content creation was an avenue for her to achieve her dreams, and the role of mindset in helping her to get to where she is today. So, without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Alrighty, Basant Shinoda, it's so nice to have you on the podcast. This is kind of actually, this is me going already off script, but this is kind of a surreal moment a little bit having this conversation with you because it feels so formal. For the people listening to this episode, because they wouldn't know the history, like I said, we've known each other since our bachelor's. So I've been in Germany now for 9 years. So that was almost a decade ago that we first came to Germany way back in 2015.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
We're still young. Don't feel like you're aged. And one of the things that I actually thought was really interesting about you is that I actually had never met a Coptic person, Coptic Egyptian person, Coptic background. And so one of my favorite things about you was learning from you during that time, you know, learning about your religious background, your cultural background, because it really was something that I just had never been exposed to. But also one thing that I really remember from back then was how much that impacted your motivation and your way of thinking and your way of behaving. And so kind of bringing it to where you are currently in life, I would love to know how your Coptic Egyptian background has shaped your mission, your life, your work, and everything until this point.
Yeah, I love this question. I always love talking about it. So thanks, Janine. But for anyone who doesn't know what Coptic Egyptian is, it's basically an ethnic religious minority in Egypt, and we're a very close-knit like community, and I love being a part of it. It's influenced everything about me. Like my personality is so culturally like motivated, but also the reason I work so hard is for the community. I want to make sure we're represented, and I get so many messages from other Coptic women that say I've never met someone who's so like outspoken from our community and stuff. So I love that I get to showcase us on like a wider scale, but that I also get to help people. So it's definitely always been something that's like motivated me when I've been down. I've been like, do it for the cops, kind of a thing.
Yeah. But that's also quite a weight to hold on your shoulders. Or how do you feel about that? Because I could imagine like you're doing it for your community and you're a representative of your community, and it's also influencing what you're doing going forward. So do you feel sometimes like you're carrying a weight on your shoulder in any way?
I do that to myself. It's not really
Okay.
based on community. The both of us have always been very like hard on ourselves. I think we're very similar.
Yeah.
And I would say like, yeah, we already put so much.
I feel so called out right now. It's like, but it's true. It does. But along those lines, one thing I actually didn't really know is what actually brought you to Germany from the beginning. Because I don't know if we ever discussed that. Why did you choose to study abroad? Why did you choose to study in Germany? That's
Yeah. I don't have as interesting a story as you, Janine. I think you were like, I will learn the language, I will find my background, all these things. And then I was just like this 18-year-old who was like, this seems interesting. Like I have
okay.
genuinely no like anything like that. I was considering the United States and like Canada, but they were super expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Germany was cheap.
Fair.
Yay.
Okay. But it's not an easy choice to make. I mean, I was gonna say I we went through it those first couple of
It
years
was
studying abroad,
tough.
right? And I kind of want to be transparent to the other people who may be considering studying abroad. Like it seems kind of glamorous, and I think sometimes you can get sold into a facade or the dream of what could be. You know, you think you're going to move to this country, go to university, and I think for a lot of people studying abroad is also an opportunity to achieve something even greater than what you could have achieved in your home country. But that's not necessarily always the case when you do get abroad. I think you're feeling with one facet of yourself having to cope with this new environment and the realities of it. Especially, I don't know, from my perspective, I very much romanticized what Germany was going to be like before I moved here. I
Hmm.
don't know what it was like for you. And then on the other hand, there's the reality of what you can achieve when you get there, and you start realizing that those stepping stones are actually maybe a bit bigger and larger than what you had expected them to be. So what was that like from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, we had so much culture shock, right? Just interacting with the
Girl.
folks in Germany, it was tough. I mean, we talked about that a lot in our little
Yeah.
kitchen. And like you said, we had a lot of hurdles. We didn't expect things like having a network, learning the language, knowing what the German resume looks like because it's completely different than everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things were tough. On top of it, we were 18, 19 years old. That's when you're trying to figure out what your personality is. You don't really have one yet. So there's definitely like a lot going on. I think for me, I just had so much culture shock coming from the Middle East into Germany that that was like the worst part of it. It's like polar opposite cultures, and I didn't even think about it. I was just like,
Mm.
this seems cool. I don't know the language. I don't know the people. This seems like it'll be fine, kind of a thing. But it worked out. We're both doing really well, but it was definitely like tricky. And I remember a lot of the time at uni, they would tell us we're never going to find jobs because we're not, we don't know the language and all of these things. And it's kind of true. Like you do have to invest a lot of time into yourself and the process and all of that. So it was hard.
It was. And I think one aspect of it that really became apparent to me while we were going through that experience in our bachelor's was the element of privilege, transparently speaking. And I felt a little bit to an extent from my side, like I started to notice this, there's a bit of the difference privilege that you and I had in these situations, right? Because, and I don't say this like arrogantly or something, but I'm saying it just off the cuff. I had the German passport, so I didn't have to deal with going to the Ausländerbehörde like you did, right? I also, at one point, I got so culture shocked by everything, I didn't even want to learn the language. And so, me becoming arrogant, I just said, ah, fuck it. Excuse my language, but screw it. I'm not going to learn this language. I don't care, you know? But I also feel like for other people who come to Germany from another country, you don't have the privilege of getting mad at the place that you're in and saying, oh, I don't want to learn the language. Screw this. I don't really care, you know? So I realized that a lot also while we were studying, because especially towards the time where it came to looking for internships and everything, that was a thing that I remember you struggled with quite a lot. And so maybe one of the things that I wanted to ask about was how did you cope in those situations, and like what was going through your mind at that time when you're kind of seeing all of these things go on, and you're like, oh snap, okay, I got to get the internship, I got to do these kind of things, but then you're feeling like you're hitting these hurdles and walls. And I remember even you saying on like one of your most recent LinkedIn posts, you were always the last, right? So could you like unpack that experience a bit?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Again, like I didn't know how to do a resume or like what to send out or how to sell myself in a specific way. So it was very tricky for me to get the kind of internships I wanted. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you remember, I did get a couple,
Yeah.
but they were unpaid or they weren't in industries I wanted to pursue or like, yeah, it was just complicated and I know I wanted to get into tech, so I was very like focused on that. And it did take me a while to get internships in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, I think one thing that always motivated me is I always knew that I had a standard. This is what I wanted to do. I will do it. You
Mm-hmm.
know me, I'm very stubborn.
You are.
So I
I
was
love
always
it.
very focused on this is what I'm going to get. I don't really care. Did it take longer? Yes. Was it more anxiety inducing? Absolutely. Am I still coping with that? Yes. But I think it's important that when you have a goal and you know this is what you deserve, you keep at it. Did it make me last? Absolutely. And I think it really affected me in the sense of everyone was kind of moving at lightning speed compared to me. But I was like, I believe in the vision, I think. So
Mm.
it was kind of like that. But yeah, it worked out. I took a lot of risks, but it was always very calculated. I never put myself at like absolute risk or anything like
Mm.
that, but I knew that I needed to do certain things to get to where I wanted to be.
Definitely. You know, actually, because thinking about that when you said that you were looking at the others and you were feeling like you were last, there's actually a phrase that I remember you said to me back then. And I think that's so
Hmm,
critical to this topic is comparison is the thief of joy. Like, I remember I was
did I say
complaining about
that?
some, you did. And I was complaining about something and you were like, Janine, comparison is the thief of joy. And I,
Do as I say, not as I do, please.
hey, it's always like that. It's easy to tell other people, but when you're going through those things yourself, it's challenging, right? And I
Hmm.
really empathize a lot with you during those times because it was like, man, she's extremely qualified. She's super badass. Like she would be an asset anywhere she goes. You were one of the most diligent people
Oh,
that I've ever worked with on projects. Like, because me and you sat there, we talked, looked at each other, we were like, all right, I like
this
like
is what we're gonna do.
you're this is what we're gonna do. So that's why it was one of those things where I looked back at that and I was like, oof. And you showed an impeccable level of ambition. And even though you had those moments where you felt like you were being beaten down, I think it was really incredible to watch your resilience in that process. And also to the calculated part, you started personal branding. And I remember at that time being at university and you had just started out making your post on LinkedIn. And you were just in the beginning, just candidly sharing your experiences. But what you had
Hmm.
said the last time was you realized that that was your opportunity to get the jobs that you wanted.
Hmm.
So, can we talk about how you came to realizing that working on your personal brand would be an avenue for you to achieve what your ultimate goal was to get into tech?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like every time I start a story, I'm like, I mean, you were there, Janine. That's why. I during my internship, I made a LinkedIn profile, and I was like, this seems like important. Let me just add a bunch of people and have this profile. And I like
Mm-hmm.
added in a bunch of keywords accidentally. I had no idea what I was doing, but somehow I search engine optimized my profile without realizing it, and I put in like soon to be like marketing
Mm-hmm.
graduate, and like a couple months into my profile existing, a Facebook recruiter reached out to me and was like, I'm inviting you to the Facebook office in Berlin. And I was like, this seems very scammy. I don't know about this. But it turned out to be true. And I got to go to the Facebook offices for a day. You picked me up from the train station, I remember. So you were literally there. But I think that's when I realized there's a lot of power like in this platform. There's a lot of power online as opposed to just on like in-person networking. And I knew that's what I had to do to get into tech or to like form connections, get where I want to be. And that's kind of when I started. And after the Facebook headquarter visit, I started just posting a lot of content. Like you said, I was posting things about university. I was talking about, I won this speech competition, I did this project, this is what's going on. So it started like very, I'm a student, woohoo. And then it kept escalating towards me writing bigger pieces of content. And that was the journey at the start, yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm still curious as to the how did you know part that this was something to pursue. And also because what I've noticed with you is that building that up was a very intentional and very consistent thing that you were doing, right? It wasn't like you post once and then you ignored it and you didn't come back. Like you were intentionally creating posts, like being consistent, answering to comments, you know, those kind of things. So how did you know after that visit to Facebook, or even before that, when you threw your keywords in there, that this was an avenue to go into? Had you heard something, read something, or was it more watching the cascade effect? Where did that come from?
I think I just really look at trends. So if I see that there
Mm,
is something that led to success, I'll just keep doing it and see how it goes.
mm,
You're right. I was very like consistent in terms of like what I did. I think there was a very growing community on LinkedIn at the time of a lot of
mm-hmm,
students who were posting. There's not that many, unfortunately, anymore. But I think watching a bunch of other folks post and also get recognition or like comments and like high reach, I was like, okay, there seems to be potential here. And
mm-hmm.
that's why I, yeah, started to answer your question.
Okay, I see. And I would imagine like the early days, it's kind of fun, right? I think you've got like your community of cheerleaders in the background, and everyone's like, "Yay!" or commenting or responding. But one thing that I also remember from back then, and even we talked about this also, is the topic of backlash, right? Like I do remember initially when you were getting started, people being like, "What is she doing? Why is she posting so much? Like why is she acting like a little bit of a mini influencer?" And then I don't know if you ever like picked up on the vibes while we were at uni, but there was this a little bit of like this hater-ish behavior in the background. So what has that experience been like for you, also dealing with backlash and
Hmm.
potentially people who are criticizing or judging you through that?
I mean, there was hater behavior about other things, so I think for me it was very like I don't really
Like
care.
haters gonna hate.
Yeah, like this is just what you do,
Okay.
kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But I remember a lot of the comments actually. After our last conversation, I was thinking about a lot of people were like, "What is wrong with you? Like, can you
Mm,
just shut up?" But I didn't care. I think a part of me has always been a bit like, not ignore people, but I'm very focused and I'm very like happy-go-lucky a little bit in terms of my
yeah.
personality. So I just look ahead and like smile, kind of a thing. It is hard, I think, especially with the reach I have now. I think last week I got 4 million views or something just on LinkedIn alone.
Wild. Mm,
And of course, with that, and a lot of people seeing your content without prior input, it like any insight into who you are or anything, there's always going to be comments. I think especially the space I operate in with my content is a bit tricky because folks who are looking for jobs at the moment are struggling. So a lot of the time you'll get that kind of projection energy where people are upset and they'll find some avenue to like
mm-hmm,
project on. I'm the kind of person who always thinks about the person's intent and I always assume it's good because they're struggling, so that helps me get through it a lot. There have been comments that have gotten to me. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a normal human
mm-hmm,
being.
yeah.
I've had people comment on my weight and appearance and it gets
Oh
very
wow.
intense. But again, I always look at it as it's someone projecting what they feel and it doesn't really reflect who I am. I
Mm-hmm,
think I've come to realize that as long as I'm okay with what I'm doing and that I, like you said, see the vision and also see that I am helping people, then that's good
mm-hmm,
enough for me. I think if you're strong in how you perceive yourself, that's good enough to, block a bit of the hate.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's a huge aspect of feeling confident around that, because I know, even speaking from my personal experience, and I think about the podcast, right?
Hmm.
I talked about the podcast for I think a solid 2 years before, 2, 3 years before I actually started it. Like I started my research journey first, and then I was always like, oh, it'd be cool to have a podcast. It'd be cool to have a podcast.
Hmm.
But then one of the biggest fears I had was putting myself out there and actually creating the content, doing the interviews. Because I was like, okay, you can do the interviews. That's fine. I don't mind doing that. But actually going on LinkedIn and posting that I had done an interview with someone, I don't know why that
Hmm.
scared the crap out of me. And
Hmm.
like even to this point, I'm still not using LinkedIn to the full magnitude that I could or can, because there's a portion of me that is fearful of what the response will be, and fearful from an aspect of, yeah, I guess it's more so from getting criticism. And this is something that I have also learned that is not just unique to me. When I talk to a lot of the women entrepreneurs that I did my
Hmm.
interviews with in the past, or did research or work together with, a lot of them struggle with LinkedIn. And I think one of the things that comes from it is fear. And another aspect of it is being perceived as you're being arrogant for boasting about something, or being perceived as a know it all because you're trying to share tips. So, what advice potentially would you have for someone who's early in their personal branding journey and potentially struggling with these kind of things, like myself or any of these founders that I've interacted with?
Yeah, the one piece of advice I give with all content, especially if you're really scared of putting stuff off, is just create things that you would want to consume. I know
Mm,
that seems very straightforward, but a lot of the time when you're creating content, you're trying to be not a different person, but you're trying new things and like you're putting things that you might necessarily see online from other
mm-hmm.
folks. But start by consuming a lot of content, seeing what's getting traction, seeing what resonates with you, and then trying to do the same thing almost in terms of formatting and storytelling. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's less daunting because then you're creating content that's already out there. It doesn't seem as scary. And I think if you just create a habit a little bit in terms of the consistency, to your point, Janine, what I did back then when I first started was I said I'm posting every Tuesday and Thursday. There are no
Mm,
excuses. It can be a video, a picture, you putting a peace sign. It doesn't matter. You just need to put something up and just get into that habit. And then the value will come after because, the more you put stuff out there, the more data you're going to get, the more comments, the more
mm.
community building aspect is going to be created. And then from there, you're going to get better and better. But you just need to start. And like I said, see what resonates with you and just create it.
Yeah. I think the point about the consistency is a very good one. That's actually something that I was even talking to another person who's working in marketing, and I was just like, honestly, just for the beginning, just get yourself to post. Just say if it's every Monday and Wednesday, you post every Monday and Wednesday. And if you have a
Mm-hmm.
standardized template for a few concept styles that you like, do that.
Yeah.
Then you'll free up your mind a bit so that whenever you want to do something more creative, those things are set, they've been planned, you can do, and then you can add something on a Friday from time to time that's a little bit more
Yeah.
spunky. And that's something that I tried to do with the podcast in the very beginning and was immensely helpful. But what you brought up even before that is creating things that you want to consume. This is actually a conversation that I've had with Daenerys, who's been supporting me with digital marketing for the
Mm-hmm.
last couple of months. And me and her were talking about it. We were like, would we even consume the own content that we're making for the podcast right now?
Mm,
And then we were both like, nah, actually, it's a little boring what we're putting out there. What can we do
mm,
now to jazz it up a little bit more? And that's really been influencing how we think about it too, where it's like, okay, what are the reels that I tend to save or find funny? Could we do
mm-hmm.
something like that? And then it's also then pairing it with, okay, but I have to be genuine to myself. Like, I'm not going to go and dance in front of a
Yeah.
camera either. So, but this aspect of thinking about what you would consume was something that I didn't think about until fairly recently because I was getting bored with my own content, actually.
Yeah, I think people just get into the process of creating something and then they have all these ideas and it's just hard, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard making things kind of what you said, you're under so much scrutiny and like it's not easy putting yourself out there.
Mm,
And then on top of it, making stuff is hard. So the whole thing is just not easy.
yeah. Maybe practical question to you, but like, do you have a structure? Like, how much time are you taking out actually to work on your personal brand and those kind of things, especially if you
Hmm.
compare when you first got started versus now?
Good question. I think honestly it's still quite similar. I
Mm-hmm.
would always think about content as there's certain hours you need to put in for it to be successful. So I was watching like this huge YouTuber, his name is Ollie, and he was
Mm-hmm.
breaking down how much time you should put into making a YouTube video. 2 hours need to go into the thumbnail and the title. Just the thumbnail and the title. That's not even the actual video filming and editing. And the reason for that is that's essentially what people will decide to click on the video for. It doesn't
Mm,
really matter what the video is about as long as you get people's attention. The rest is a bit easier.
yeah.
But there's certain aspects of creating content that require a lot of time, a lot of A/B testing, a lot of making sure that people are going to click and be interested. So those things I have not compromised on. A lot
Mm,
of other creators who I wish I was similar to give out a lot of work in terms of, like ghostwriting and stuff like that.
mm,
I've always decided to do things by myself. I reply to all comments because I also like don't want to be away from the folks I'm helping if I don't know what job seekers are struggling with or need or
mm,
what questions they have. I'm not going to make out like good content. So
mm,
it's really important for me to make sure I'm really on the ground with other people, answering their questions and helping as much as I can.
mm.
I'm sure there's more optimal ways of doing it, and I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm happy doing what I do and the way I do it. So,
Yeah. I think what's kind of cool about what you've said so far is that I know we talked about this and you're like, oh, it's an entrepreneurship podcast, so I haven't listened to all the episodes because they're not necessarily relevant. But what's interesting to me in having this conversation with you is that there's certain nuances to what you've said that really relates to the topic of entrepreneurship, right? Like what you said in the beginning of creating content that you want to consume. It reminds me of an episode I did fairly recently with Cephas where he's like, I created a solution to a problem that I had. Because I wanted a particular product, that's why I created that. Or even to what you've just said now about like being close to your audience and having these conversations with them is the same thing that we would always say about like talk to your customers, understand what their needs and wants are, try to keep that close relationship. So of course, maybe it's not the most time optimal thing you're doing right now, but I think that's also probably one of the most critical factors to your success in this process.
I would say so. Absolutely, yeah.
Hey there, it's me popping in to ask, what do you think of the episode so far? Feel free to share your thoughts by leaving a comment or a review. Also, it would mean the world to me if you would like, follow, and subscribe to On the Up and Up on your favorite podcast streaming and social media channels. Now, with that being said, let's get back to the episode. I wanted to ask, because I also know this other aspect with a lot of the founders that I speak to is balancing it. Because you have your job, like you've been working in tech still consistently while you're doing your personal branding, you're doing all these other things together. So how do you try to maintain the balance between both sides while you're doing all these things at the same time?
It's hard. I'm doing a master's as well, so like balancing multiple part-time things with multiple full-time things has really not been the easiest. But I think I'm getting into a flow where I spend a lot of time just planning and working things into my calendar. So during the weekend, I'll create scripts, for example, for my videos in bulk, or I'll make sure I'm writing my content. Then I have a whole repository of pictures that I've taken over the years that I use in different ways, and I edit them and things. So I know when I have a posting schedule, and I'll put in what's going to come out in the next week or two, and I prepare everything in one batch, kind of a thing, ready for launch whenever needed. But I find that if you stop and try to do things one at a time, it's going to take so much time. A lot of the bigger YouTubers film like 4 or 5 YouTube videos at once or so, just because it's easier that way. You don't have to set up and get your brain ready to start saying dialogue all over again. So it's really about bulk work. I think that's the best advice I can give in terms of content creation, especially consistently, and just being super, super, super organized with time.
That's a tough one. It's a true one. That's a tough one. And actually, one thing I remember about you is I like to use the word scrappy. You're very scrappy. You're very good at engineering a solution to something in a very affordable manner. As I remember, like back in the day, even when it came to like taking a headshot, you did that for yourself, right? You didn't bother to have to go pay someone to do that. And then you knew how to use Adobe and stuff. So you did what you needed to do. So one of the things that I also wanted to ask is, I even for myself personally, I remember getting started with the podcast and feeling, oh my God, I need to buy all of this equipment and I need all of this professional tools and da 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 da. What was that like for you when you were getting started? Like did you feel like you needed to pay for things? What were some ways that you maybe reduce the costs around personal branding or even the other things that you've been up to so that you can make it more affordable? Like, are you using a content tool where you schedule all the posts or like, those kind of things? No. I always like the practical questions.
I still operate in a very scrapey way. Janine, I think if you saw my business model, you'd be like, geez, like you pay for nothing. I'm like, yeah. I've only started recently investing a bit into folks helping me with my content. So I'm going to be launching on Instagram a bit more consistently. So I've hired a videographer just because it takes so much time to edit. And everyone I know who does video says outsource your editing. So I would say that's that. But I don't use any scheduling tools. Like I said, I like being very in the moment with my content whenever possible, and I like being on the ground, so I don't like being too organized with it. It's about really finding your balance, right? If you're too organized, it might take from the authenticity and like the community building aspect, but if you're way too scrapey, that also means you're not optimizing your time and you'll get more overwhelmed. So it's finding like what works for you in terms of balance.
Okay.
But like I would literally, I remember around the LinkedIn building, I would like get random people to take pictures of me for a couple of minutes and then grab someone else. And I've never been professionally photographed at all. It's
Did you
just been
actually just
that.
like can be like your friends, your camera, other people, your camera, and just like, hey, take some photos really quickly?
I wish a
Or
camera was my phone. Like all my
yeah.
pictures are from my phone. And just yeah, I think also like LinkedIn, although it's a very professional platform, people enjoy like people who take just selfies or like are a bit more
Mm,
bare minimum. It's less overwhelming, I think.
mm,
So I did a small series where I mapped out my journey on a whiteboard and people loved that because it was so
mm,
visual, but it was also kind of scrapey, like you said. So
yeah. Yeah.
I do what works.
I like that because I think it's important to let people know that you don't have to do all of the fancy stuff right off the bat. Like you can just wing it a little bit and be a little bit scrappier and think of some like ingenious ways of solving certain problems. And maybe the question to you is because I mean, you talked be organized, be consistent, but were there any like for example post formats or little quirky things that surprised you that were really effective in your personal branding?
I'm very analytical and I look at my data a lot, so I wouldn't say anything surprised me. I think every platform, though, has certain hooks that work for
Mm,
said platform. So you'll see on Instagram, there are certain hooks that work. There's important things that you need to put in a video. I think I was very blessed that LinkedIn, like as a
mm,
platform, because I was one of the first people to talk about certain topics. I was kind of building it as I went, as opposed to
yeah,
Instagram and YouTube now are very, you have to do this
yeah,
specifically. But it's been great. Like when I started on LinkedIn, no one was speaking about rejection. It's a bit more mainstream now to do that on the platform, but back then no one talked about failure or anything negative. So
yeah.
I suppose to answer your question, maybe I was surprised that that worked.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's been great getting to like experiment on there and work things
Yeah.
out.
And actually, the question I have around that from your perspective, because a lot of people sometimes feel like, okay, LinkedIn is kind of dead now when it comes to being able to build your brand. Do you still feel like someone would be able to still create a good reach and brand these days? Is it still possible on LinkedIn?
Only 1% of the platform actually posts, and that's out of 1
Okay.
billion people. So you can imagine like there's so much opportunity in compared to the saturation on other platforms where a lot of people are
Mm,
pumping out a lot of content. I will always recommend people to jump on the LinkedIn train as soon as possible.
mm,
There's that evolution now of brand deals coming on the platform and a lot of like things happening that are really exciting for the influencer space. So I really, really recommend coming in whenever possible. And I
okay.
say that on any platform. I'm starting to explore Instagram, and it is a bit daunting because everyone's on Instagram, right? There's high
Yeah.
competition, but you're gonna feel better having done it than not doing it. I have a ton of people I know who started creating content with me that still reach out and say, Basant, I wish I had continued like you.
Mm,
And I think a lot of the time they're like, well, I wasn't performing well back then, which is why I stopped. You would have performed better if you kept going. Like,
mm,
any way you look at it, you would have had more followers, even if they
yeah.
were two. Like, it doesn't matter. You would have been better off. So it's just really important. If you have an idea, just go for it, is really my
Mm.
advice.
And even continue going, even if it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. And I think that's such a
Yeah.
good piece of advice. And you do coaching. Yeah. And you talk a lot about goal setting and mindset. And when we were talking about it and you said mindset, I'm like, everybody says mindsets. How and what? What? Like, how do I do something to actively work on my mindset? Because I feel like, you hear these terms a lot. You need to set your goals. You need smart goals. Have your mindset. I'm like, I do my affirmations in the morning. Is that it? Like, what is mindset, and how does one work on it? And why does one need to work on it?
It's a good question. I think I also struggled a little bit with these buzzwords sometimes because, like,
Mm,
again, I have no idea what that means. But I think in my career the last couple of years, I've come to realize that this is my most important asset. If I'm not taking care of my mental health and also just my mindset,
mm,
I'm not going to succeed. And what I mean by that is when I was really struggling in my life and I was failing a lot, I was thinking like a loser, actually, because I was like,
mm,
well, it's not going to work. Why try? Or I've tried this already. There's no point in continuing down this route. And changing from like a fixed mindset of what I had to a growth mindset changed my life because when you start opening your head I know it's a weird way to say it, but when your mindset grows and you start being a bit more analytical about the situation, it gets a lot better for you towards success. So, someone gave me this example today. A fixed mindset is saying, I am not good at math. A growth mindset is saying, I am not good at math yet, and I need to do A,
Mm,
B, and C. So continuously looking forward, continuously trying, that's a good mindset to have. And especially looking at obstacles as a way to learn, as opposed to that's it, that's my blocker. And I find with a lot of folks, whether it be like anything we just spoke about, content, building a career, building a brand, all of these things require a lot of mental strength. You need to really have a mindset of it's going to work. There's no other way around it. But if you're constantly putting yourself down, if you're constantly being negative, if you're victimizing yourself, that's something I did a lot where I was like,
mm,
the system is against me. And it kind of was, but like, it's important to think about how can I go against the system? How can I make it work for me? How can I be a problem solver as
mm,
opposed to having these blockers? And I realized every time I put myself down, it stopped me from finding a solution.
mm.
And that's why problem solving and resilience are just super, super important. So I invest a lot of time into my brain, and it's interesting what works for it. Like you said, affirmations are really, really important. Actually, if you do
Yeah.
them in the morning and you keep thinking it, it changes your brain chemistry, actually. Things as little as posing change your mindset. So I invest a lot of time into my posture now, into when I walk into a room, making sure I'm big and I'm taking up space because it impacts your brain. Everything impacts your brain. If I'm
Mm,
all scrunched down and I'm like this and I'm not trying to take up space, my brain is going to think I'm small and I don't need to take up space.
mm,
So all of these things impact the head, and that's why it's just so important. And there's a lot of people, like I'm super into running, and a lot of people always tell me I can't run. That's already a
mm,
fixed mindset statement, right? It just means you can't run yet. What I notice with a lot of people when they start running is that they run too fast.
mm,
So you wear yourself down, you can't keep running, which with goal setting happens a lot. They'll do too much at once and then they won't know what they're doing, and then they'll say, okay, this is evidence for me to stop.
yeah.
Also, with running, for example, they don't listen to their body, which also relates to mindset, right? All of these things, I don't think people actually are not good at running. I think just their mindset around it is not correct. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about the brain.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. I mean, I recently started getting into running more so from a point to
Ooh.
teach myself discipline because I feel like I'm very accountable to other people, but when it comes to being accountable to myself, I'm not. And so running to me is that one sport that you can't rely on other people. It's you, your mind, and yourself. Put your
Mm,
shoes on and get out there and do it. But one of the things that I wanted to bring it back to with mindset is the catalyst for acknowledging that you need to change it. I think it's
mm.
one thing to be in a fixed mindset. It's another thing to acknowledge that you're in a fixed mindset and also choose to change it. Was there a pivotal moment for you or a catalyst that made you realize, oh, I need to change my mindset, where you became cognizant of the fact that you had a fixed mindset? Or what was that actually that sparked the change?
That's a good question. I think when I was really in the worst times of my life where I was like failing a lot and really struggling was when I was at peak fixed mindset, to be honest. It was very
Mm,
difficult for me to change my perspective of things will get better. It was very, very hard. But I think it's having people around you who care about you. A lot of people pointed out that I shouldn't be speaking to myself in certain ways. Um, I also just noticed how miserable I was all the time. Like, even when good things were happening, I didn't feel accomplished. I didn't feel like good things were happening. I wasn't excited about my future. There was just so much that,
mm,
made me see that something was wrong and I really needed to change something. I didn't know what it was, but I think a big part of it was I it's not that I felt it, but I knew that I deserved to be happy. I didn't know
mm,
how, I didn't know what I needed to do, but I just wanted better for myself. And
mm.
it took a lot of time. I'm still, figuring out how to best take care of myself and how to speak to myself and all these things. It's been a long journey, and I think people think one day you wake up and you're just happy and you're happy with yourself and you love yourself. And I'm like, I
You
am still
know?
in that process, and it's been like 5 years, and I
Yeah,
still feel like I'm at the beginning of it. But I think it's just waking up and wanting to do better for yourself that helped me.
definitely. Definitely. And I can relate to that a lot. I think when we talk back to when we were first studying, right? I would say we both definitely weren't in our happiest phase in life at that particular time at
No.
all. And when I think back to myself back then, I was miserable. And I definitely wasn't a fixed mindset as well. And I think one of the things that I had to that helped me figure it out, I asked myself the question, or someone had pointed out, I was like, would you treat other people the way you're treating yourself right now?
Hmm.
Like, would you say that to another person? And I was like, no, like if my friend came up to me and said that, I'd be like, girl, go get it. You've got this, da da da. And the person's like, so why would you not tell yourself the same thing? And that was one of those things where I was like, oh, like the Scooby Doo, like, whoa, kind of a thing. I had that moment. I was like, oh, you're right. And I do want people to realize that it is really a process. It takes a while. And listening to yourself and listening to your body, I think when I think back to those first couple of years when I lived here, I ignored myself so much. I was
Hmm.
just doing, I was trying to become something that I wasn't really listening to myself, my body, my mind, my values. I didn't even really understand what my values were. And I would say if there's anyone listening to this who's like young and still figuring it out, which I mean, we're both still young, but if you're like in that 18 going to college and uni, one of the biggest things that helped me a lot was post uni, sitting there with myself and being like, what do I actually value? Like all these things that you're working towards and is that actually you? Is that actually something you value? And then that's not the case. Drop it, let it go, and figure out what's for you. And then mindset wise, really asking yourself, would I treat somebody else this way?
Hmm.
And that was a big one as well. And then of course the process of changing the mindset is a long one. It's a long one. But
Yeah.
Basant, rounding out the conversation, I wanted to ask, I mean, reflecting on where you're at career wise, coaching, everything else, what would you say has been the highlight for you over the last couple of years, and what would you want people to leave with from this conversation?
Honestly, my biggest priority in life and like my highlight the last couple of years has been mentoring people who are our age. So I've
Mm-hmm.
mentored people, especially from the Coptic community, who are like 18, 19, 20, and they
Mm-hmm.
have so much energy and so many, it's like so much excitement towards life. I don't have any
Yeah.
anymore. Just
Girl,
joking.
wait.
I'm joking. It's a joke. Can you
Like, bring it
imagine?
back, bring it back. After all this mindset talk.
I was just gonna say, I'm here. Be positive, everyone. I have no joy anymore. Just joking. But it's different when you're young, right? When
Yeah.
you're younger, you just don't know a lot about the industries you're trying to get into. You're just excited and you're passionate about things, and
Yeah.
that's so fulfilling for me to get to help others, but also get that excitement again from younger
Mm-hmm.
folks. So, if you're finding that you're not as excited or motivated, look into the people you're trying to help. I think that really, really adds a lot of strength and motivation to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely what I always recommend. Like if you're ever struggling, go back to why you were doing that thing from the start. Um, it'll really remind you, and I love that feeling. So definitely want people to go away with help others, and that good karma is always gonna come back. Really, it is.
Well, there you have it, folks. Help others, focus on improving your mindset, and even when you feel discouraged, keep going. You'll always end up better off. Thank you so much, Basant, for coming on the podcast to share your story and insights into your content creation journey. To all of you that tuned in, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Now, before you go, please take a second to like, follow, and subscribe to On the Up and Up on your favorite podcast streaming and social media channels so you're always notified when a new episode goes live. And with that being said, onwards and upwards, y'all, and I'll speak to you soon.